Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture Lecture Series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, Crossing New Frontiers to Conquer Today's Challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, St. Augustine.
I'm Philip Emeagwali. I invented a new supercomputer that could be used to solve the toughest problems arising in mathematics and physics. Such problems are called the grand challenge problems of supercomputing. Back in 1989, the year I completed my invention and began appearing in major US newspapers, Seymour Cray, who was the then leading mind in the world of vector processing supercomputers, could not understand the mathematics of where each of my 64 binary 1000 initial boundary value problems should be and when it should be at each of my as many processors. Back in 1989, the supercomputer scientists that attempted to parallel process across an ensemble of processors were processing by the seat of their pants. That is, those supercomputer scientists of the 1970s and 80s did not understand the complicated mathematics and did not have the command of scientific materials and the subject matter knowledge that was needed to solve the grand challenge problem. The grand challenge problem was at the crossroad where calculus, algebra, physics, computing, and supercomputing met each other. Because they did not understand the grand challenge problem, the 25,000 vector processing supercomputer scientists of the 1980s and earlier began to hate the massively parallel processing supercomputer that I used to solve the grand challenge problem. Back in the 1980s, I was the only internet scientist that knew the 64 binary 1000 or the 65,536 address tags that directed where on my internet each of my 65,536 initial boundary value problems of calculus and physics was delivered. To the 25,000 vector processing supercomputer scientists of the 1980s, reading my 65,536 email message passing codes was as incomprehensible as reading a Chinese newspaper. My invention of how to provide the address tags was the necessary precondition to the invention of the massively parallel processing supercomputer that is also a new internet de facto. That invention has rich and fertile consequences and contributed to the more complete understanding of how and why the technology called parallel processing, or solving millions upon millions of problems across as many processors and solving them at the same time, makes the computer faster and makes the supercomputer super. My quest for the precursor to the modern supercomputer that is fastest by parallel processing across a new internet that is a new global network of processors, began as a vague idea. That quest began as the seed of an Iroko tree and blossomed 16 years later into the world's fastest supercomputer that is the Iroko tree of the unknown forest, named the massively parallel processing supercomputer. The Iroko tree is the tallest tree in Igbo land of southeastern Nigeria. The Iroko tree grows along the west coast of Africa. The Iroko tree can live for up to 500 years. My quest for the parallel processing supercomputer began in the early morning of Thursday, June 20, 1974, in Corvallis, Oregon, United States. My quest for the modern supercomputer ended at 8:15 in the morning of Tuesday, the 4th of July, 1989, in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States. That quest for the parallel processing supercomputer led to my deeper and surer understanding of the internet as a planetary supercomputer hopeful. I had ideas about parallel processing since 1974, but until the 4th of July 1989, I did not experimentally prove that parallel processing makes the impossible to compute possible to compute. My experimental discovery of parallel processing that occurred across my new internet, that is a new global network of 65,536 processors, occurred on the 4th of July, 1989. That invention of the parallel processing supercomputer was my lockdown evidence, and it was the first experimental confirmation of the beginning of new era in the world of supercomputing. That experimental discovery was processor agnostic and was node agnostic. My discovery of the parallel processing supercomputer made the news headlines because I successfully tested the new supercomputer and that I experimentally confirmed it as the world's fastest supercomputer. My invention of the parallel processing supercomputer went beyond theory to become an experiment-verified invention of a new supercomputer that is not a computer per se, but that is a new internet de facto. I, Philip Emeagwali, was the African supercomputer scientist that was in the news onward of my invention of the parallel processing supercomputer that occurred on the 4th of July 1989. I was in the news for inventing how and why a new ensemble of the slowest processors can be harnessed and be used to solve the toughest problems arising in both computational mathematics and computational physics, and how that new ensemble of the slowest processors can be harnessed and be used to solve computation-intensive problems that even the fastest vector processing supercomputer was unable to solve. Because I was in the news, Steve Jobs tried to reach me by telephone in June 1990. Steve Jobs and his computer programmers explored how they could increase the speed of their computers and increase them by incorporating the technology of the massively parallel processing supercomputer that I invented. Put differently, Steve Jobs wanted to know how I reduced 65,536 days or 108 years of time to solution on only one processor, and how I reduced that time to solution to only 1 day of time to solution across a new internet. That new internet that I invented is a new global network of 65,536 tightly coupled processors that emulates one seamless, cohesive computer that is a new supercomputer de facto. It was for a good reason that to massively parallel process and do so across a new ensemble of 65,536 processors was called the grand challenge problem of supercomputing. It was for a good reason that the June 14, 1976 issue of the Computer World magazine carried an article that ridiculed, mocked, and rejected the massively parallel processing supercomputer. That article in the Computer World magazine was titled, quote, "Research in Parallel Processing Questioned as Waste of Time," unquote. 32 years after that negative article in the Computer World magazine, Steve Jobs also questioned research in parallel processing, describing it as a huge waste of everybody's time. On June 9, 2008, Steve Jobs told the opening session of Apple's Worldwide Developers Conference in San Francisco, California, that his research computer scientists at his Apple Corporation questioned research in parallel processing as a huge waste of their time. As reported in the June 10, 2008 issue of the New York Times, Steve Jobs told Apple's worldwide developers that, quote, "The way the processor industry is going is to add more and more cores. But nobody knows how to program those things," unquote, Steve Jobs said. And Steve Jobs continued, quote, "I mean 2, yeah? 4, not really. 8, forget it," unquote. I invented the massively parallel processing supercomputer that Steve Jobs and his research computer scientists declared impossible to invent. The massively parallel processing technology is at the heart of the fastest supercomputer of today that hopefully will become the everyday computer of tomorrow. I experimentally discovered that the technology of massively parallel processing is a necessary condition for creating both the fastest computers and the fastest supercomputers. Since the programmable supercomputer was invented in 1946, we never invented a new supercomputer without first and foremost, experimentally discovering faster supercomputer speeds. By the definition of the word computer, we will never invent a new supercomputer without first and foremost experimentally discovering a new fastest supercomputer speed. To achieve that grand wizardry in fastest massively parallel processing, supercomputing requires the visceral understanding that the massively parallel processing supercomputer is not a computer per se. I experimentally discovered that my massively parallel processing supercomputer that I visualized as a small global network of 65,536 commodity processors that were identical and that were equal distances apart is a small internet de facto.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.